I've been performing the midnight ritual for as long as I can remember. It's not something I learned from a book or stumbled upon online. It's been a part of my life, passed down through generations of my family. My grandmother was the one who taught me, her hands steady and her voice calm as she guided me through the steps for the first time. She was deeply involved in the occult, though she rarely spoke of it outside the family. She believed that certain rituals were necessary, not just for spiritual growth, but for protection. The ritual itself is simple enough. At midnight, I light a single candle, draw a protective circle around myself, and recite a chant that has been in our family for centuries. The words are in a language I don't fully understand, but I've memorized them nonetheless. The purpose of the ritual is clear. It's meant to ward off the evil spirits that seem to have attached themselves to our family. A curse, my grandmother called it, though she never told me how it began. After my grandmother died, the ritual became even more important to me. It was the one thing that made me feel connected to her, as if her presence lingered in the room with me each night as I performed it. It brought me peace, a sense of security that I couldn't find anywhere else. The world outside might be chaotic and unpredictable, but within that circle, I felt safe. I've never questioned the power of the ritual. Why would I? It's always worked. I felt its protective energy surround me, like a warm blanket on a cold night. But lately, something has changed. It's subtle, but unmistakable. The ritual doesn't feel as strong as it used to. The sense of security I've always relied on is starting to slip away, replaced by a creeping doubt that I can't shake. I can't help but wonder if it's just my imagination, or if something more sinister is at play. For the first time, I'm starting to fear that the ritual might not be enough, and that terrifies me more than anything. It started with the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe the old pipes creaking in the walls. Nothing unusual in a house as old as mine. But then I noticed that the whispers only came at night, after I had performed the ritual. They were faint, barely audible, but persistent. It was as if someone or something was speaking just out of earshot, their words lost in a hiss that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the more I tried to brush it off, the more unsettling things became. Doors that I was certain I had closed were now slightly ajar when I walked past them. I would find them open just a crack, as if someone had been watching me from the darkness and left in a hurry when I turned around. Then there were the cold spots. They started in the hallway, a sudden drop in temperature that would make me stop in my tracks, goosebumps rising on my arms. At first, it was just one or two places in the house, but soon, the cold seemed to follow me, moving from room to room as if it were hunting me. I'd walk into the kitchen, and the chill would be there, wrapping itself around me like icy fingers. I turned up the heat, but it made no difference. The cold was always there, lurking. Despite all of this, I kept performing the ritual, hoping it would restore the peace I was used to. But each night, the ritual felt weaker, less effective. The sense of protection I once felt was slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the cold spots more frequent. I began to feel like I was being watched, even in my own home, even within the protective circle that had always made me feel safe. For the first time in my life, I started to doubt the ritual. I began to wonder if it was losing its power, if something had changed in the fabric of the spell that my grandmother had entrusted to me. It was a thought that filled me with dread, one I couldn't easily shake. If the ritual wasn't enough to keep whatever was out there at bay, then what would happen to me? It was a night like any other, or so I thought. I went through the ritual as usual, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling of unease that had taken root in my chest. I lit the candle, drew the circle, and chanted the words, my voice steady but lacking the confidence I once had. The flame flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, but I forced myself to believe that everything would be fine. It had to be. I went to bed, trying to convince myself that I was safe, that the ritual had worked. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it, like a dark cloud hanging over me, pressing down with a weight that made it hard to breathe. I must have drifted off at some point, But it wasn't a peaceful sleep. I woke suddenly, my heart pounding in my chest, and I knew immediately that something was very wrong. The room was thick with a suffocating darkness, far deeper than the usual night. And then I heard it, the sound of heavy breathing, coming from somewhere near my bed. It wasn't mine. I was holding my breath, too terrified to move. The breathing was slow, deliberate, and it felt impossibly close, as if someone was standing right beside me in the dark. I strained my eyes, trying to see, but the shadows seemed to move on their own, shifting and twisting in ways that defied logic. Then I saw it. A shadow, darker than the others, standing at the foot of my bed. It had no form, no face, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. The air around me grew colder, and the whispering started again. But this time, the voices were clearer, more distinct. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were words, and they were speaking to me. "You can't hide," they hissed. "It's too late." Panic surged through me. I threw off the covers and scrambled to relight the candle, my hands trembling so badly that I nearly knocked it over. I tried to chant the words of the ritual, but my voice faltered. The usual calm, the protective warmth that should have enveloped me, was nowhere to be found. The shadows only grew darker, closing in on me, and the voices grew louder, more menacing. "You're ours now," they taunted. "The ritual won't save you." I repeated the chant over and over, but it was useless. The shadows swirled around me, and I could feel the malevolent presence pressing in, suffocating me with its intensity. I was trapped, surrounded by darkness and cold, with no way out. The candle flickered weakly, its flame barely clinging to life, just like me. In that moment, I knew whatever power the ritual once had, it was gone, and I was completely, utterly alone. By the next morning, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept after what happened, too terrified to close my eyes, afraid of what might be waiting for me in the darkness. My heart pounded with every small noise, and my mind was racing with questions and fear. The ritual had failed, something I never thought possible. And whatever was in my house now, it was something I couldn't face alone. There was only one person I could think of who might understand what was happening. My friend Claire. She'd always had an interest in the occult, much like my grandmother, though Claire's knowledge was broader, filled with the kind of arcane information that I had always avoided. I didn't know if she could help, but I was desperate, and I needed answers. When I called Claire, she could hear the fear in my voice. She came over right away, and as soon as she walked into my house, I could see her expression change. She felt it too, the cold, the oppressive weight in the air, the subtle but undeniable sense that we were not alone. I explained everything to her, my voice shaking as I recounted the previous night's terror. She listened intently, her brow furrowing in concern as I described the ritual and how it had always worked before. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, as if piecing something together in her mind. "I think I know what's happening," Claire finally said, her voice low and serious. "The ritual you've been performing. Did your grandmother ever tell you where it came from? Or what it was really for?" I shook my head, feeling a pit form in my stomach. "She said it was for protection, to keep evil spirits away. That's all she ever told me." Claire sighed and rubbed her temples. "It's more than that. Rituals like this, especially ones passed down through generations, they're often tied to the bloodline. Your grandmother's death might have weakened its power because the ritual wasn't just protecting you. It was binding something. Binding." The word sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" Claire looked at me, her eyes filled with a grim seriousness. "The ritual was likely keeping something far worse at bay. Something that's been connected to your family for a long time. With your grandmother gone, the ritual's power has started to fade. And whatever was bound by it is now trying to break free." I felt the blood drain from my face. All this time I thought the ritual was just a shield, a simple act of protection. But now it was clear that it had been so much more. It wasn't just warding off evil, it was holding something back, something ancient and dangerous, something that was now slipping through the cracks. "What do I do?" My voice was barely above a whisper, thick with fear. How do I stop it? Claire hesitated, then reached into her bag, pulling out a worn, leather-bound book. There might be a way, but it won't be easy. We'll need to strengthen the ritual, maybe even modify it. But I have to warn you, it's risky. Whatever your grandmother was dealing with, it's powerful. If we make a mistake, it could make things worse. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle on my shoulders. I had no choice. Whatever was coming, I had to face it. The ritual had to be restored, its power renewed. Because if it wasn't, the thing it was keeping at bay would be unleashed, and I wasn't sure I'd survive what came next. The sun had set hours ago, but I couldn't bring myself to start the ritual right away. Claire had helped me prepare everything, but now it was just me, alone in the house that no longer felt like home. The air was thick, oppressive, and every shadow seemed to crawl with unseen malice. My heart raced, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my skin. I knew this was my last chance, and that knowledge made the weight of what I was about to do almost unbearable. Claire's instructions were clear. The variant of the ritual we were about to attempt was far more dangerous than the original. It required more power, more focus, and it would force me to confront whatever had been lurking in the darkness all this time. But it was the only way to restore the ritual's strength, if I could survive it. With trembling hands, I lit the candles, their flames casting eerie, flickering shadows across the room. I drew the protective circle, but this time it felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the very act of creating it was pulling something closer. The chant I had known for years now had additional lines, words that Claire had found in her ancient texts, words that felt wrong on my tongue, words that vibrated with an energy that made the air hum with tension. As I began to speak the chant, the temperature in the room plummeted. The cold I had felt before was nothing compared to this. It was a bone-deep chill that seemed to suck the warmth from my very soul. My breath came out in shaky puffs of mist, and the shadows around me began to twist and writhe, as if something within them was trying to break free. I forced myself to keep going, even as the dread in my chest grew into a physical pain, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The candle flames guttered, struggling to stay alive, and the shadows grew darker, deeper, until they were almost solid. Then, as I neared the end of the chant, it happened. The entity revealed itself. It emerged from the darkness like a figure made of shadow and smoke, towering over me with a presence that seemed to fill the room, crushing the air from my lungs. It had no clear form, its edges shifting and blurring, but its eyes were two pinpricks of glowing, malevolent light, and they were locked on me. A wave of pure, unadulterated fear washed over me, freezing me in place. The whispers from before were now deafening, a cacophony of voices that echoed inside my skull, telling me to stop, to surrender, to let it in. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't. This was my only chance, and I had to see it through no matter what. I screamed the final words of the chant, pouring every ounce of my will into them, forcing the ritual to take hold. The entity recoiled, its form flickering as if it were struggling to maintain its presence in the physical world. But it fought back, pushing against the barrier I was trying to rebuild, trying to break free and consume me. The room shook, the walls groaning under the strain of the conflicting energies. The cold intensified until I could barely feel my fingers, but I kept going, my voice hoarse and ragged as I finished the final verse. The entity lashed out, its shadowy tendrils whipping through the air, striking the circle with a force that sent sparks flying. The whispers turned into a roar, a furious, otherworldly scream that threatened to tear my mind apart. And then, with one last, desperate shout, I completed the ritual. The entity shrieked, a sound that reverberated through my very bones, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world was collapsing around me. The shadows flared, then imploded, sucked back into the darkness with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet. The candle flames shot up, burning bright and fierce for a split second before extinguishing completely, plunging the room into pitch-black silence. I was left standing in the dark, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The oppressive presence was gone. the air slowly warming back to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I didn't know if I had truly banished the entity or merely delayed its return. The ritual was complete, but the house felt different. Emptier, yet somehow more dangerous. I stared into the darkness, my mind racing with doubts and fears. I had done everything I could, but the nagging question remained. Was it over? Or had I only just begun to understand the true nature of what I had been dealing with all these years? As I stood there in the silent, empty house, I couldn't help but wonder if I had truly won, or if the worst was yet to come.